What's up, everyone? Jordan Bates here. Today, I'm excited to share with you a conversation that I recently had with Mike Slavin in sunny Costa Rica at the Imiloa Institute right before our recent Apotheosis retreat. Mike Slavin is a magician and poet exploring the intersections of wonder, uncertainty, and self-deception. Mike is also a strategist on the High Existence team and soon to be the new director of High Existence. Mike is really one of the most brilliant human beings I've ever met. He has a luminous mind and incredible powers of articulation and eloquence, and it's been rare to meet individuals in recent years whose worldviews map onto my own as much as Mike's does. I think there's a lot of beautiful similarity in the way we perceive the world, and also some beautiful differences. And in this conversation, we explored the topic of transcending the rational mind and the topic of kind of accessing trans-rational and more kind of holistic and intuitive, flowing, synthesizing forms of human intelligence, and kind of dethroning the rational mind and putting it in its proper place as a faithful servant rather than kind of a master. And this turned out to be a beautiful treasure trove topic to mine into and excavate. We both had a lot of insights and thoughts on this, and I think we were able to weave our thoughts together into a really nice synthesis, a really nice kind of intertwining dance of ideas and perspectives. So I had a lot of fun with this conversation. I really enjoyed recording it, and I benefited from it a lot, and I truly hope you will do the same. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Mike Slavin.
So to kick things off, Jordan, I want to ask you, what does it mean to transcend the rational mind, and why is that something that anyone would want to do anyway?
It's a great question. Yeah, something we've been talking a lot about in recent days in private conversations. And I think that what immediately comes up for me is my personal story of being someone who spent a lot of years being really heavily identified with the rational mind and attempting to parse the world and parse my life through the lens of rationality, and really putting rationality on this pedestal and thinking that the best way to understand life and the best way to proceed in life and make decisions in life was to try to think my way to the answer and figure out kind of the logical solution to everything. But over time, it gradually became clear that over-identifying with that rational capacity and putting the rational mind on that pedestal and trying to have it be kind of the king of the way I interface with reality wasn't the most workable, wasn't the most optimal or skillful way to go, because that actually led to a lot of anxiety, because I was trying to use the thinking mind to solve things and to understand things in a linear kind of logical way that aren't best understood or parsed in a linear logical way. And so really in the last couple years, most notably, although there have been kind of undulations of this throughout my adult life where the pendulum of my mind and the way I interface with reality has kind of swung back and forth between being more rational versus more intuitive. But in the last couple years, there seemed to be a really quite decided shift in the direction of dethroning rationality as really even close to the primary tool that I use to parse reality, and kind of putting it in its proper place as kind of a really useful tool or servant in particular contexts that in which that kind of logical problem solving scalpel is useful, and instead tapping into kind of a more trans-rational way of interfacing with the world in which rationality becomes just a tool, and other forms of human intelligence become more primary, and those other forms can be difficult to talk about, but it's related to a more intuitive, kind of holistic, synthesizing, flowing intelligence, and an intelligence of the heart and the body, and kind of like deeply getting in touch with yourself and deeply listening to yourself. And through that deep listening and deep internal experiences and even mystical experiences, arriving at a sense of a felt kind of at-homeness in reality and in the present moment, in which you're trusting and surrendering to the flow of reality and allowing reality to kind of unfurl before you and reveal kind of the next chapter of your path, and kind of reveal this felt sense of a kind of capital O okayness of everything, and a capital F like fit of how you just fit like a glove within this reality, and you can coast down this river of reality. And yeah, that's, I suppose, kind of a mouthful to start with, but that's
more than a mouthful.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's
it's a 3-course meal.
Yeah.
No, but
I don't know what comes up for you.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I love when you started to trail into that sense of at-homeness, because I think we have a lot of similar experience when it comes to, when we were younger, being validated for our intellects and really prizing that capacity, our ability to, make sense of the world through our rational, sort of symbolic, manipulative, articulating mind. And I realized as I became more at home in life and with what this was, I started to see that the mind was always trying to like filter and categorize and make sense of the world to compensate for that lack of trust or that lack of at-homeness that I had felt. And so I was constantly trying to like build my model of everything that would be predictive to help me feel more certain and secure in the world that is always in flux and always changing. So no matter what happened, I would construct these models, or this is how things go, and then it would bump up against the larger reality, the larger, sort of amorphous, not apprehendable, sort of grand mystery. And then there would be this friction that would happen up against that, and I would need to, retool or rebuild the sort of models that I had arrived at. And it caused a lot of anxiety and just a lot of discontent in my experience of life. Not partly because my attention was always on like how I can filter and how I can, put this, like extract the lessons and put them into my model of the world, and I had less of a just blank, open, sensory experience with life. And part of the distinction, I think, is to be made, and this is, when we open this conversation, it's about transcending rationality, not eliminating rationality, not, sort of tossing it aside, because I think it is an incredibly precise and valuable tool, like you said, that logical scalpel. But it's I think for a lot of people, it can serve, especially if they lean on it too heavily, it becomes this tyrannical force on their experience, and they just become encased in rationality and lose their sensitivity to the living world. And so I think of the difference between tools versus tyrants. Like, same with when people talk about, transcending their ego or things like that. It's not about eliminating an experience of egoic tendencies. It's recognizing that's a tool that is useful in ways, but if we are solely identified with it, then we become subject to this like tyrannical, oppressive force inside of our own experience. And so one of the key distinctions for me was just looking into what's the difference between the symbolic self, or what could be called the sensational self. And to me, the symbolic self is a derivative of the sensational self, which is a more basic experience of life, attuning into the sort of textures and the granularities of the vividness that is this like glowing, or the bulging and effulging, as you said recently, that kind of life, the like that kind of unspeakable sort of fluxness that is this moment and this continuing sort of unfolding. And as I was more capable of penetrating that without needing my models to intercept it in very specific ways, it's expanded the usefulness of rationality, because now I can build new models, and I don't need to be constantly validating the other models that I had built in order to feel safe. So it allows for this sort of trans-paradigmatic relationship.
Yeah, I love that. It's fascinating how I think David Hawkins says that thought is basically the mind's attempt to rationalize the presence of a feeling. And so it's interesting how it sounds like for a lot of years you were building up these models and these castles of concepts to try to attain a feeling of security or certainty. And that's, I think, what a lot of people unknowingly are doing with rationality. They think that they're just objectively attempting to understand the world, but actually there's this deep down feeling of not being at home in the world, or there's this deep down in touchness on some level. There's this in touchness with our fundamental predicament of actually being in a kind of groundless situation in reality, a situation of groundlessness in which things actually are not certain, and they are constantly changing, and no one knows the final answers. And to feel at home in that situation really requires going down to that level of feeling and like bathing in those feelings and feeling them very deeply and fully, and becoming okay with that situation and letting go of the fear around that situation. But instead of doing that, people try, because rationality has been put on this pedestal as the ultimate tool, people think, or they don't necessarily consciously think this, but they unconsciously try to use rationality to solve this fundamentally almost existential situation by creating a model of reality that feels comfortable to them and gives them the illusion of certainty. But like you said, then that ultimately just, I mean, it smashes up against reality at different times, and it can't ultimately like solve that fundamental like psycho-spiritual emotional predicament like that's within the self, that rationality can be like a defense mechanism or a compensation for like building these castles of concepts.
It can't quench that thirst.
Right.
You know, it just kind of, there's sort of a treadmill analogy to the process, because you're consistently being exposed to novelty or new experiences that require the adaptation of that novelty into whatever the models are. And then it's just like you're never can just like, unless you completely start to isolate yourself, you can't like remove the changing nature of life in order to like keep your models intact. And so I think the piece that you're speaking to is part of, I think about the fuel source that's running inside of the modeling or the rational like sort of tool. Is it this sense of like needing to arrive at certainty and discover certainty and figure things out and all of that stuff? If it is, then it's not really being used for its optimal, like it's not really being put in its optimal place. It's kind of just sort of running around itself. It's not fully apprehending life and using it in a way that's useful. And so I think in being able to reside more deeply in that sense of home and in that spaciousness, from there it feels like rationality can emerge in ways that are useful, because it's not trying to prove itself. So it almost like expands the kind of information input that's able to like get processed. So yeah, what
do you think is the relationship between mystical or psychedelic experiences and finding that sense of at-homeness in reality?
Yes.
Is there a connection there for you?
Absolutely. I think that it's, and we know this from researching awe which surprisingly psychologists didn't start researching until a few years ago, maybe not until like 2003 or something like that. But when someone encounters an experience of awe, which you could say is very similar to a mystical experience, or you could say is very similar to a deep psychedelic experience, like there's obvious like shared patterns within those things that we've given just assigned different words to. There's a sort of disruption that happens in the function of modeling the world, you know, and so we have this exposure to the sense of vastness, which to me is an encounter with the mystery or the grand question mark on life, and it inspires that sense of doubt, but not in a bad way. It's this deep mystery that challenges the sort of the kingdom of rationality in a way, because it shows how utterly insufficient it is to fully grasp the true nature of life. And so as that starts to happen, then we can begin to build those models like on the foundation of that mystery in a way, or a relationship with it, and in touchness with it, rather than trying to build the models like on themselves and sort of try to allow those to be the foundation, because very easily those things can be subverted. And we've seen that in science with these paradigm shifts that, you know, sort of change the foundations of things, Copernican revolution, and, you know, just things that completely change our conception of what the world is. So there's that experience, that encounter that disrupts the concept making part of the mind, that almost allows for this more of the sort of, you know, spiritual oxygen to get in, or something like that, and it creates this space that then permits a person to see beyond those models, or the way that they had been seeing the world. Because I think what happens is rationality, it's hard to see the difference between the models and the world beneath them and underneath them. That's the whole, you know, the map is not the territory bit.
Yes.
And I think that's so important to grok, because that is, I mean, that's it. So I think that's my answer.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah. And when you get that breath of spiritual oxygen, as Mike put it, that penetrates through the fortifications and the maps of the rational mind, and you come into direct contact with the raw, visceral, experiential data of life itself, of nature, of kind of direct contact with nature without the filter of these maps, which abstract you away from the raw experience. There can be a deep sense of an enormous kind of liberation taking place, actually, where all this like scaffolding that you thought you needed to hold up your sense of kind of security and understanding in the world, like you built this house of cards with ideas, and you didn't realize how precarious it was, and how you're balancing on that the whole time, and how it was fundamentally kind of shuddering because there's this underlying fear. All that can just be swept away, and you realize you don't actually need it, or that it, you know, again, that you could later repurpose it and use it in certain contexts, and it can be highly useful in certain contexts, but that can be swept away, and you can come into direct contact with nature with a capital N, and you can find in that experience this deep bliss and peace, and this kind of implicit communication that it's okay, my child, take a deep breath. It's okay. You can trust the universe. You can trust nature. You can trust the path in life. And that, I think that taking that leap from this place of this like gnarled existential predicament of fear to this place of trust and almost faith in the universe, in nature, in God is kind of the fundamental thing that resolves that knot. And I think mystical experiences actually instead of it having to just be a leap of blind faith, often people think that they have like trust or faith in God, but it's not a deeply felt trust based on experience. It's actually it's another fear-driven map where they have a specific concept of God, and they think my map has to be right or else my world is going to break down. And that's why you see religious wars and stuff, because it's not actually true mystical experience underlied religion. It's actually like mysticism having been frozen into a map and then dogmatized, and then humans fighting over the maps as they always tend to do. But when you go down to that layer of that level of direct mystical apprehension of the mystery with a capital M, and this just glorious, unbelievable, beautiful mystery. I mean, right now we're sitting in Costa Rica, and I'm looking out at the ocean and the jungle, and the clouds in the sky and the birds flying by, and the message that just seems to be emanating out of every micrometer of this immediate phenomenological experience is like, you are in a beautiful place, it's okay, take a deep breath. And sure, that's not everyone's experience at every time, but I think mystical experiences provide a portal to having what can truly feel like a direct experience of something worthy of a word like God. And when you have that experience, it can really melt away a lot of that fundamental underlying like tangled doubt and uncertainty and this deep resistance, which I think, the rational mind can just never resolve that. The rational mind will run itself in circles for decades. It'll build enormous castles of concepts. It might start killing other humans who have different castles of concepts, but it can never resolve that fundamental tangle. So
that opens up. That was great. There's a lot of things that that inspires in me. One piece that I'll start with briefly is when you share that the mystical experience evokes something deserving of the word God. For me, I find the truth in those words, and it's also important to note that it's then using that word for something new or something different that isn't necessarily what the rational intuitions would believe. So if you haven't had this experience, the word God comes packaged with all of this baggage and all of this culture and this these rules and these personifications and all of that stuff that is not what I think Jordan is talking about when he's saying that. It's something that it's part of, and it connects to this whole deeper than rationality thing. It's going beyond these symbols. And one of the things that, as I continue to consider your question about what role does the mystical experience have in allowing us to see beyond or at least transcend rationality and put it in its proper place, is the recognition that we have this ability, wonderful ability, to categorize things and sort them and put them in their place. And even if you're not, someone who was highly validated for your intellect when you were a kid, and so you clung to it as hard as Jordan and I, there is still that knee-jerk reaction of putting things in their boxes, and that inhibits us from having the experience of what I would describe as marveling. And that's part of what Jordan was doing when he was, we've got this beautiful scene and setting over here, but there's landscapes or places that are beautiful even beyond their picturesqueness. Think about when you encounter a tree on a given day. It's so easy for us to put the blinders on and just be tumbling in our mind, completely sort of dismissive and irreverent towards the uniqueness and the complexity of that specific tree's blossoming beauty. And because we sort it into the box, that's just another tree. I know that, I've been there, I've done that. There's something that I think part of what is meant around the idea of being reborn is being able to see things with these fresh eyes, past our preconceived notions and conceptions of things, into the deeper reality that's in front of us. And so I think that to the extent that a mystical experience can expose us to that and allow us to see more deeply into those unique sort of beauties everywhere. The wood grain, there's probably, wherever you're sitting right now, there's beauty around you that has gone unnoticed, and so part of the mystical experience for me has been a deeper invitation into my attention attuning to those things. And the other piece that I'll share is, within those categorizations, we also have those categorizations for ourselves. So there's the tree categorization, but there's also the me categorization. And the mystical experience helps break that so that we experience ourselves as more a part of and in union with and in exchange with this deeper symphony and swirl that is life. And then I think that is a key part of the experience, because then we start to feel like the part of what's difficult about rationality, it's informed by language, and baked into language is this sense of separateness, and it helps disrupt that so that we can feel a deeper communion, and not just in the sense of the words or like getting, oh yeah, at the bottom we're all connected in some way, but no, there's this deeper interdependence that all of us have. There's this relationship that's there, and so that's the piece that I wanted to riff on.
Absolutely. And it's mind-boggling to realize the extent to which the rational paradigm is actually baked into the phenomenon of human language itself. Like, we don't realize that these linguistic systems that we're using are systems of categorizing the world as a collection of separate objects. By naming things, we chop the world up and turn it into this collection of separate objects, as Mike is talking about. And instead of seeing like the bark-clad earth claw erupting from the soil, we just say, oh, it's a tree, And it's like and we don't realize the extent to which this linguistic, rational map is actually filtering reality for us and causing us to view ourselves as a separate object and not an inextricable portion of this ever-unfurling capital M mystery of being, which I appreciate Mike's clarification that when I say God, I'm not talking about a guy on a cloud, but rather God for me is basically synonymous with this capital M mystery or capital M nature that you come into contact with when you dissolve temporarily the linguistic filters over your reality, the linguistic and rational filters that want to categorize everything and chop everything up and quantify everything. And that's where mystical experiences or psychedelic experiences can temporarily melt away those linguistic filters so that you come into raw, unadulterated contact with the kind of all-enfolding ocean of reality, and you see that you are a wave on that ocean, just as the tree is a wave on that ocean. And when you have that direct experience, there can just be a direct apprehension again of this kind of sense of this sacred sigh of relief. Like, oh wow, I don't have to think this rationally, but I just know this in my heart that actually everything is okay. Everything is deeply, truly okay, and it's where it needs to be, and I'm where I need to be, and I see now that the neurotic rabbit holes and spirals of my rational mind have to a great extent functioned as a kind of nihilism-producing trap that was preventing me and blocking me from having this direct apprehension of the gloriousness of reality, because I was attempting to use the rational mind for a function for which it is not well suited, basically. Yeah. So that's what...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as you were talking, I had this sensation of it being so interesting that in this moment, I mean, we're very sort of delicately engaging in some of these like subtleties, but deploying our rationality in order to parse some of these things, almost like standing outside of the that sort of layer of what the tendencies are and observing them with our rational mind in order to try and sort of use it against itself in some way, so that it, like, by pointing to the ways in which how we use it, we can see beneath it and see underneath it in some way. And because otherwise, you know, how would we communicate this like these arcs to you outside of sitting here silently, like with peace in our eyes, and which might be, you know, not that interesting to listen to.
Next episode.
Yeah. But I think another thing to just kind of ground this in really a specific piece that feels relevant to me and sort of play with language. I love when we can take things that for a lot of people occur as synonyms, but we can add distinction to them that make them mean very different things. And you sort of, I think, were swirling around this a bit earlier. And part of what I would want to venture into is the difference between belief and faith. And I think I first started to gather this distinction from Alan Watts, but it's this sensation that belief is the sort of rigid clutching of a certain castle of concepts, and it's holding, and it's, no, whatever it takes, I'm going to hold on to this thing, and I'm going to believe it, and I'm going to make sure that it's true, and this is the belief. It's the holding motion. But faith is this. It's open. It's the space. It's beneath those concepts. It's not holding to a concept. It's not a conceptual orientation. It's a more of an embodied relationship with life. And from that place, it's hard to describe. But a lot of times I notice that people use, I have faith in God, or I believe in God, and those things mean the same thing. And I'm wanting to color some distinction here. I'm curious if that resonates or brings up anything for you.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great way of clarifying what I was saying earlier about people. Yeah, they'll use the words like I have faith in God, but what they actually mean is I'm dogmatically clinging to the map of reality created by modern Christianity and force-fed to me through an early life indoctrination process, and I'm heavily attached to my particular doctrines and ideas about what God is, and I've personified him, and I think he has all these rules for me, and I think if I'm a bad person, I'm going to burn in a pit of eternal damnation, and there's this whole like web of concepts around it, whereas yeah, that to me is again a function of the rational categorizing or pseudo-rational symbolic conceptual mind, but the truly nourishing, like fear-melting faith or trust is this fundamentally non-dogmatic, non-believing process where you don't. It's not about having particular specific ideas that you're very invested in those ideas being true. It's more like just a deep surrender to the mystery and to the kind of river of being, but like having this deeply felt sense that on some level we're being supported and being guided, and that everything is capital O, okay, on the deepest level at all times, and you don't know the fundamental nature of reality or what you are or what consciousness is or what God is. You realize that the conceptual mind is an utterly primitive apparatus that would not be capable of grasping those things, that the magnitude and labyrinthine nature of the mystery just transcends all human comprehension. But you can have these direct experiences through mystical experience or through deep flow states or deep states of meditation or profound synchronicities that occur in your life that seem to give you this kind of direct first-hand experience of almost like a wink from the universe, where you just feel that you're right where you need to be, and everything is aligned, and that it's okay to trust. And so you leap then into that space of trust, kind of, and it can be kind of based on that experiential evidence, but it's not leaping to any dogmatic map or any firm conclusion. It's just it's surrendering to this into this space of not knowing. Actually, you don't know, but you trust, and you're just open and flowing. Like that's yeah, what it seems to be.
And I feel like a part of that liberation in that space that opens up is when rationality is dethroned in a certain kind of way. That means that we start to relate to ourselves differently. And I think part of rationality's MO is the thingification of the universe, part of what you were describing earlier, like making things and like making things objects and all of that stuff, which is obviously without a doubt incredibly useful. But we have to be able to step away from it and also recognize that relating to ourselves as a specific entity or an object is really not a good analogy or assessment. I mean, you can probably think of how you've changed over time, and you could think of competing orientations, like very sort of chill and just relaxed versus very excited, and you've inhabited both of those at different times. And so the self isn't like this like straight line object that is just going through time like a fastball. It's more like, we don't really have good words for it, because it's something more like, it's like hyperdimensional, and across any kind of like thing, any sort of like polarity, you can probably find examples of yourself inhabiting one side of those polarities at different parts of your life at different times. And so a lot of the conceptions that we have of ourselves are such fabrications, and there might be some truth to it, but part of the fabrication is within how much is missed, how much goes outside of the assessment. And part of the assessment is derived for convenient emotional reasons, part of what you were describing earlier about, the rational mind tries to justify the existence of a feeling. We construct these versions of ourselves in order to fit a sort of emotional landscape. And when inside of this space, we were talking about this just earlier, and in the conversation, it was just so rich and becoming apparent. Like there's the deeper knowing of like your soul's radiance, like this just effervescence and this beauty, this gorgeousness, this and this pristine, like I'm running at the limits of my words trying to articulate this, because it's this unflinching love that has always been there. And that is the true beauty of who you are, beyond these like limited, just pigeonholed kind of like castles of concepts that allow us to try and like grasp ourselves. It's like we can't really do it. We can't behold with the rational mind our true essence. It's something that needs to be experienced to have that knowing. So there's something really important here, because I see so often people relate to themselves as less than they are because of, for whatever reasons, the experiences that they've had. And so I ask for you to challenge whatever those assessments that you have of yourself, because there's something much deeper in you, and something just this swelling beauty that goes beyond anything that you are or have done. And it's your birthright. It's literally been here with you all along. And I guess if there was a place if there was a real, one of the beautiful places to arrive at when we stop throning rationality and we can use it for its intended purpose, maybe not intended purpose, but use it for a more optimal purpose, it's that coming into contact with that. And then we can bring that to the world, and in doing that, we get to evoke the beauty and the gifts in others, because if we know it in ourselves, we can see it in them. We're not confusing, we're not trying to compete with our badges and our like accomplishments and seeing, well, I did this thing, you've done this thing, and we can let all that stuff begin to dissipate and commune on a level of soul and reverence, and from there, who's to say what can emerge.
Beautiful. True communication can then take place beyond just our maps of reality smashing into each other. We can actually begin to see and feel another being in their depths. I feel like what Mike just said is a really good place to kind of wrap up this conversation. I think that that's quite a natural concluding point. One thing that came up that I wanted to add is just on a practical level, a thought experiment or perhaps almost like consciousness experiment you can begin to run to break the identification of yourself as just this like limited body object in the world is one that is based on phenomenology. I don't know which particular phenomenologist first spoke about this idea, but in the realm of phenomenology, there was one or more philosophers who spoke about how the self, your immediate phenomenological self even, is not at all contained within the skin of your body. They spoke about how your body and your skin in the immediate world is actually the limits of your perception of all your senses. And so right now, and if you think about it, it's my personal individual consciousness right now is illuminating everything within this immediate domain. So it's really like the reason that those clouds and that distant oceanic horizon even exist right now in the way they do through my eyes is because my consciousness is illuminating them. And so there's a very real sense in which your skin is like the limits of your vision and the limits of your hearing and the limits of what you can smell. And then you can start to feel the essence of yourself expanding out of the skin-clad ape suit and actually just expanding and blooming into this broader sense of like, oh wow, I'm way over there too. Like my consciousness is literally illuminating that ocean over there, and you can start to feel this continuum. That's a good way to begin to feel this continuum between yourself and the things around you, rather than seeing a world of separate objects, I think. So.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a lovely sensory experiment.
Yeah, good way to begin taking this rather abstract attempt to talk about the ineffable and move it into an area of practicing it and playing with it and seeing what emerges. So any final thoughts?
One final piece that is inspired by what you just shared, and I think, and there's some way that these two relate, but maybe it's related to this sense of faith or this sense of trust piece. I think a lot of times, especially if our perception of the world is being dominated by like rational assessments and all of that stuff, and we don't feel okay in uncertainty. There is a sense that we need to hold it all together. We need to hold it all together. I feel like I have to hold it all together. And I just invite the recognition that whatever this is, whatever this world is, has been holding you together this whole time. There's some force that there's reason that you're not, splintering off into particles like Thanos snapped his fingers or something like that. You're constituted, you're held together. And in a deeper sense, you're held. You're not just held together, you're held. And so in experiencing that cascade, almost like going outward, and then feel the shore come back in and feel that almost as like a loving embrace from life, because you're surrounded from all sides by the universe, by this permeating force. And so something to try on and see what it does.
I love that.